Okay, this is good. Thank you. Hello, Heidi.
Hi, Agota.
I'm just so glad we are having, this is going to be the second conversation about our devotion, in a sense, to SoL and what we are about to do at the end of May at a SoL learning journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea is that we share some of our passions and reasons why we come together in different parts of the world. And I know that you, for example, will come over to the heart of Europe, as we call Hungary, to the heart of Europe. And I hope you will have a heartfelt experience here. But from far away, from the States, from Santa Fe. Are you there now?
Yes, and in fact, we call this the heart of the United States.
There you go. So it's
On the
going to
tree
be
of
an
life.
encounter of hearts.
Yeah. If the
But it
tree of
is
life
interesting.
if the tree of life were placed on top of the United States, we are the Venus gate. Santa Fe is right at the place that's most feminine and heartfelt.
Is it one of the reasons why you moved there?
I didn't know that at the time, but yes, there's a real deep, we have thousands of years old pueblos here, and it's the oldest city in the United States. It's quite different than most of the United States in that sense. It's very deep.
I remember when you were here, was it like 10 years ago? Something like that. You came for the systemic coaching course together with Rick, and we were having it at Patnahazi rate, not very far from my place.
Right.
And I remember a conversation on the bench when we, after the course, dived into the similarities of the people in your area and some of the mythological understanding of the people of this region. And who knows, there might well be some truth about it. And it sounds like far-fetched from our job, our work, which is more working with organizations or communities. Or recently you work with a lot, I know, with cities. And yet I think there is something very, very essential in that probably the original people in your aboriginals in your area, or some of the assumptions about this area of Europe, I think we hold some close relationship to the soil, to Mother Earth. And there is a growing and awakening desire to do that. But this is how I would like to connect our work now, because I think it's, as much as it's beautiful to see this developing and awakening desire, I think the tools and the means and the ways how to go about that have changed quite a lot since then. And one of the passions and realizations for me when I connected with SoL was that those 5 disciplines actually offer a fantastic opportunity to reawaken some deeper sense of our togetherness, either in an organization or in a community or in a habitat area. So what's your experience? Because you put your finger in business and NGO and community and civil sector. So how could you bring that into one umbrella?
Well, actually, you mentioned something about the connection with SoL, the 5 disciplines. To me, the reason that I'm involved with SoL or deeply hopeful about what SoL can bring is a couple of things. The first, that it is about a collective experience. It's about what would it take for us to be as great as we could be collectively rather than just individually. And it's a whole set of living approaches to revealing that in practice and in everyday work or play. And that to me was extremely important, that the work that we have to do now in the world, that it requires an ability to experience oneself as part of a whole. And without that, you just don't have what you need to be able to see or even have the energy to approach the very complicated and complex problems we have now.
So what you're saying is that either we are able to expand our awareness to kind of grasp and embrace the whole, or
Yes.
we really will shrink into our small identity and mostly driven by fear and control because we are not able to understand what is happening on the larger scale.
That's right. And we have a choice. I mean, we can go back and forth between an individual identity and a larger and larger sense of self. And what I've always loved about SoL is it gives us tools and contexts in order to experience ourselves that way, which that's the only way we can take on what's happening now. The other thing.
Which of the 5 disciplines would you think are the most important in this respect?
Well, every time you'd ask that question, I would come up with a different answer because they are facets, and depending on where people are, the one that is called forth is often the one that we're least aware of. So I love personal mastery. I mean, mental models are absolutely critical for self-observation, big self-observation. And yet I think the thing that I most resonate with the work that we do with emergent learning is this team learning, is the ability for a team to iteratively through time observe their mental models and the way they think about things such that actions and results change. Ari DeHoos used to talk about it as we could measure it very clearly by time to solution or who's involved, or there's all sorts of ways to measure that. But the idea of an iterative practice where we are aware of who we are in the world and we're continually learning new ways to frame how we see such that can manifest is really very important in a systems approach to the world.
It's a little bit difficult to hear you. Somehow your voice goes and comes. I don't know. But coming back to team learning, which we rarely emphasize in the 5 disciplines, because somehow I think about 20 or 30 years ago, there was already a booming of teams and teams and teams in organization. But I think very often it was mistaken for training or team building, etc., etc. Whereas what you're talking about is coming into fashion, if I can put it like that, only recently, where the learning aspect of the team as a collective becomes more and more important. And in order to enhance that learning, there are extremely exciting methodologies recently applied and used. And yet, the crux of the matter, at least in my practice, is that if somebody doesn't have the hands-on personal experience, it's almost impossible to explain to them what that means. And because it looks very free flow, for some people, it's still frightening, it's not structured enough kind of understanding, because the learning aspect is really for the team to engage in dialogues in a way that they actually, in the process of become more and more aware.
You've frozen. I think I've lost you.
Oh, you've lost me. So my question is, what is your...
Yes, now you're back.
What is your experience with this team learning or collective learning in organizations and the cities, which are becoming more and more important and exciting, I think?
Well, over the last 8 years, we've done emergent learning with whole cities, with living cities, which is the job of living cities is to make sure that the resources that are being dedicated to development of cities in the United States are actually shared with the people with the least resources. Usually when cities are developed, they move people out. They build on top of people. And there's a real concern here that if we don't include everybody in society, that this solution won't be sustainable anyway. So, you know, and we'll end up with social problems that are just pushed to the edges, but which continue to persist and to affect everyone's quality of life. So I've been working with large organizations and with cross-sector, with whole counties, on how to address intransigent issues like literacy by 3rd grade, or the ability to have a community development that includes everybody in the decisions, right? And that has brought me over the 8 years to very different types of communities. We're training a number of different people around the world. Some of them are working in Africa with peacekeepers. Some of them we're now working, we have people that are part of our cohort that work with Native American Pueblos. And and for us, the basis of the work is always, when we say team, that could be a community. That doesn't mean a small team. In fact, in Indian River County, it's hundreds of people that consider themselves to be part of something that a community wants. You know, shared vision. They have a shared vision, and they want to achieve that together. But they understand that unless they're learning through time about how they come up against the edges of their own understanding, their own mental models about each other, if they're not able to observe that in the process of achieving the aspiration of the community, the shared vision, that they can't get beyond those. And so
that's exactly. Very often, if we go back to this other discipline, the shared vision, it has been, there is a very old friend of mine from this International Women Dialogue in the 90s. She lives in and works in Norway, Marjorie Parker, and her passion is about developing shared vision. Her first book was about that. The book she came out recently was about that as well. And, you know, originally in the mid-90s, I remember when we were talking about shared vision, then it was a little bit like, even in the core course, the SoL core course, it was like working with our inner vision and then sharing it, hoping that something meets and emerges. But I think it has changed so much, the concept, the practice of that in the past 20 years. And this is where I believe presencing came into the picture. So that basically learning to let go of my personal vision and creating a collective space for some collective vision to emerge, as you talk about emergent learning. It's such a different, paradigmatically different approach, I believe.
Well, it's interesting, for the last 20 years of my practice, first with organizations and now with cross-sector social change in large communities or cities or states. Actually, I'm working in New Mexico now. The first step always is to have people have a really clear picture of what we mean by the community we say we want, and give people the whole community a chance to actually articulate what it would look like if we really had achieved something that we were proud of in 5 years or 3 years, or we used to do 10. We don't do that anymore. The first time I ever did this was with Dana Meadows at, back in 1980, when I was helping her put on a series of colloquia about ending hunger. And the question was how to feed the world sufficiently and sustainably. We were just going to ask a quick question the first night, what would your vision be? We had experts from all over the world in the United States, Vienna, and Asia. What would it look like if your vision of feeding the world sufficiently and sustainably were met? And it ended up being, the first session at Dartmouth ended up being all 4 days. We ended up talking about that because there was so much emotion tied up in people's ideas about what that would be and how impossible it would be to achieve, right? So all of that emotion came out, and it was only after that emotion is touched that you have the energy to actually take on the work. Now, what's changed, I think, since those days is, at least in our work in emergent learning, is that we use the emotion that comes out of that and this vision to create a taste for action that actually then gets adapted through time as people learn how their mental models in the process restrain them, how we are the constraints. And that only when we take on something that we care about that much do we actually see what's stopping us. And to me, that's learning. When you find out what it was that you actually assumed could or couldn't happen, and you take that on and learn together, then the results accelerate. We learn faster than the speed of evolution when we do that.
I want to share with you just the beauty of my language, Hungarian, because in Hungarian, actually, the word imaging, vision, is képzelet, imagination. But actually this, which is picture, cape, but it actually, so you see it, and when you really see it and you put your energy in it, then you are capable of doing it. So it's the same word, to see in an image and to be capable to do. It's exactly the same root word in our language. So in a sense, I always say, we can do it if we can envision it. Basically, that's what it is. And I think this is why it is a core aspect of the 5 disciplines, definitely. And the other thing you mentioned again is something which has been up in the air for so long, this emotional aspect. When you work with visions, then you can't get around the emotions because they are just evoked in the group, in your heart, in your mind. And how to learn that it becomes actually the energy behind to fuel your action. And that's what I think is important, especially in a society which has become a lot more rational and a lot more mechanical and orderly, but emotions have a different kind of modality of making us move.
Yes, well, emotion, it's the ability to move forward. It's not, and it's different than feelings. But to the point you just made, first, I love what you just shared with me about Hungarian and the word cape. It is absolutely consistent with my experience. But to your point, we're now experimenting with so-called, funny word, non-traditional communities, which means here, non-Western communities, which means indigenous communities and people from other parts of the world that aren't rational the way we are, and yet are phenomenal. They're intuitive, and what we find, the common tool that I think is even more, if you can call it a tool, that's even more important nowadays is storytelling. It's the ability, it's what, when I worked at Ford Motor Company, the CEO I worked with called it a story dime. He said, if you could tell a story about something that had seemed impossible, but was now complete and had been done, the story holds in it the wisdom. And now working with the indigenous communities and with the communities in Africa that I was mentioning, the stories are so important. It's not a rational approach to learning. It's telling the archetypes and the stories of a culture that allow the people in it to create realities that would otherwise be inaccessible. I have to let my dog out.
Fortunately, there comes.
Yes.
Dog or what?
What?
Was it the dog?
My dog, yeah.
Our dog. So fortunately, actually, the storytelling is coming into great fashion in Hungary as well, but it has never really died out. We have loads of stories which we usually tell children, but for nowadays the adults are really starting to feel how wonderful and nurturing and healing and evocative and developmental the stories are. So that's really beautiful. I think it's also very important. And as you say, becoming global more and more, we really have to learn now these different modalities of getting to know the world. And so many people in the world just operate differently. This, what we have been talking about, is, to me, is an articulate Anglo-Saxon kind of culture. Talk, in a rational way, beautifully expressed, but somehow a lot more restrained in many other modalities, of relating to the people.
Mhm.
And for many people, this just doesn't work.
Right.
Even in our culture, it just doesn't work. So the last point I want to bring in, because I don't think we have a lot more time, is the system thinking. Because the way system thinking has been applied in our community or in our culture brings in the vision, making the invisible connections and the dynamics in the system actually visible by the archetypes. And it's beautiful how Hus works with schools and children also, but it's like it brings up to the surface something. So it relates to what we talk about. And then we can apply storytelling in relation to the system which we have identified. Do you manage to bring that in your usual daily work? How does that? Because that's what I find.
I would say that's the foundation of my work in every minute. And
Mhm.
it's also the foundation of my life. You shared with me the Hungarian word. I study Sanskrit, and in Sanskrit, there's a really interesting phenomena that the root of the word of parts of speech, the root of grammar, is the word create, krit, right? And when you change the word krit, you get the noun, you get the verb, you get the subject of any sentence in Sanskrit. And in fact, in Sanskrit, you don't have I am. It's built into the verb itself. I don't know if it's like that in Hungarian, but
It is, yeah.
when they
That
ask,
aspect.
how do you change from an instrument of action, the object, to the agent of action, that which actually manifests? The change is simply that that in the agent of action, the sutra that describes it is what it says in English is bringing the system within. When one has the system within, when I see myself as the whole, then I become an agent of action. I am not just an effect. I'm not just an instrument, although it's not bad to be an instrument too, but to be swatantra, to have the system within, is where you begin to actually see the world as a place that you are dancing in, not at the effect of. And that to me is what systems thinking
Beautiful.
does. It gives us this beautiful palette to play with rather than be afraid of. And that's what it's about.
It sounds beautiful. It is really beautiful. I think it's just that I don't want to bore the listeners if somebody listens to our conversation, but we certainly can guarantee that if they come to our SoL week at the end of May, they're going to have more about that, because that's where system thinking, science and art and tradition can meet and enhances our would-be communities or the would-be world, which are all so much engaged in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I so look forward to being with you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Only 3 more weeks. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.